Hi everyone, welcome to today's GCSE Higher Revision video, and there's 67 days to go into your GCSE Maths exam, so keep up the hard work. And today we're focusing on a very important topic, and that's factorising quadratics. So we're going to look at how to factorise quadratics and how to solve quadratics by using factorisation. We'll look at the quadratic formula and completing the square later, but today we're going to focus on factorising quadratics and solving equations using factorising quadratics. So that's two things we're going to be looking at today. They're very important topics because not only might you be given questions where you're asked to factorise a quadratic, or to solve a quadratic, which is factorize and then solve. You may also need to use factorizing quadratics within a question. So for instance, there might be a question where you're using algebraic fractions perhaps, and you might need to factorize a quadratic to then cancel things down and so on. So factorizing quadratics is a very important topic, and I would say it's worthwhile spending some time and investing some time into it now so that you're really confident with it, particularly in 67 days. So if you do have the revision cards, card number 27 is on factorizing quadratics and card number 28 is on solving quadratics using factorization, so they might be useful for you as well.
So here's our first question. It says to factorize x squared plus 7x plus 12. So it's very important we can factorize quadratics. And if you think back to our expand in two brackets video, we looked at expand in two brackets, and whenever you expand two brackets, you get things in this form, this quadratic form. So whenever you've been asked to factorize a quadratic, you want to put it back into brackets. So we want to find what two brackets, whenever we expand them, give us x squared plus 7x plus 12. Now, because the x squared is going to be an x and an x at the front of both brackets, because x times x is x squared. So that's fantastic. Now, in terms of finding what goes in the brackets along with the x, because this is just an x squared quadratic, it's quite straightforward. We want to find two numbers which will multiply together to give us the 12, because whenever we expand our brackets, the last thing we'll do is this number times this number, and that will give us 12. But also, because it's just an x squared quadratic, this number plus this number will equal 7. So the two numbers in the brackets here and here will multiply together to give us 12, and they'll add together to give us 7. And that works whenever we've got quadratics where it's just 1x squared. So here we want to find two numbers that multiply together to give us 12, and they'll add together to give us 7. And I'm thinking 4 and 3, because 4 times 3 is 12, and 4 plus 3 is 7. So in our brackets, we'll have x plus 3 and x plus 4. Now, you could have written it the other way around and written x plus 4 and x plus 3, but it doesn't actually matter which way around you have these two brackets. So we were asked to factorize x squared plus 7x plus 12. The answer would be x plus 3, x plus 4. And you can check that. If you expand these brackets, you'd get x squared plus 4x plus 3x plus 12, and the 4x and the 3x will add together to give us the 7x. So that's it. Okay, let's have a look at our next question. So our next question says to factorize x squared plus 3x minus 4. Now feel free to pause the video and give this one a shot now if you want to. Okay, so if we've been asked to factorize this quadratic, we're going to have our two brackets, and then because it's x squared, we're going to have x and x at the front of the brackets. Now we want to find two numbers which will multiply together to give us negative 4, and they'll add together to give us 3. I'm thinking negative 1 and 4, because negative 1 times 4 would be negative 4, and negative 1 plus 4 would be 3. So that means in our brackets we'd have x minus 1 and x plus 4, and that's it. So if we've been asked to factorize x squared plus 3x minus 4, it'll be x minus 1, x plus 4, and that's it. Okay, let's have a look at another one. Okay, so we've been asked to factorize this quadratic, so let's put our brackets down. Because it's just x squared, it's going to be x and x at the front of the brackets. Now in terms of the two numbers, they'll multiply together to give us negative 55, and they're going to add together to give us negative 6. So we want to find two numbers that will multiply together to give us negative 55 and add together to be negative 6. So I'm thinking negative 11 and 5, because negative 11 times 5 would be negative 55, and negative 11 plus 5, going back up 5, would be negative 6. So it's going to be x minus 11 and x plus 5, and that's it. And you could have written x plus 5 and x minus 11, but it doesn't actually matter which way around the brackets go, and that's it. So in the brackets it'd be x minus 11 and x plus 5. Okay, let's have a look at our next one. Okay, this time we've been asked to factorize x squared minus 13x plus 22. So again, feel free to pause the video now and factorize this quadratic. Okay, so we're going to put our brackets down. So bracket, 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 bracket. Because it's x squared, we're going to have x and x. Now we want two numbers that will multiply together to give us 22, and they'll add together to give us negative 13. Now because they multiply together to be a positive and add together to be a negative, well, think of things that multiply together to be positives. It could be a positive times a positive, but when you add them, you would get a positive, or a negative times a negative, which if you add those would give you a negative. So the two things in the brackets will have to be negative. And I'm thinking negative 11 and negative 2, because negative 11 times negative 2, well, 11 times 2 is 22, so negative 11 times negative 2, and negative times negative is a positive, that'll be 22. And negative 11 plus negative 2 means it go back down 2, so it'll be negative 13. So that means in our brackets we would have x minus 11 and x minus 2, and that would be that factorized, and that's it. Okay, so now let's have a look at how to factorize a quadratic in the form of 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. So we've been asked to factorize this, and this is a bit different than the ones we've looked at so far, because instead of it being 1x squared or x squared, it's 3x squared. Okay, so we've got 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into brackets, so bracket, 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 bracket. Now here we've got 3x squared, so we want to think of what can go in the front of the brackets which multiply together to give us 3x squared. And I'm thinking 3x and x. That's quite nice because that's our options, 3x and x. It's if you had something like 8x squared, you could have 4x and 2x, or 8x and x, and so on. So here, because it's 3x squared, that's quite nice. We've got 3x and x. Now, we know the two numbers will still, this number and this number will still multiply together to give us 2. So this number multiplied by this number will give us 2. And then we also need to figure out, if we put them into the brackets, whenever you expand the brackets, where they would go, so that whenever we expand them, we get our 7x in the middle. So in terms of our 7x, I want to get 7x in the middle. So I'm thinking, because the two numbers are going to multiply together to be 2, I'm thinking 1 and 2 here. So I've got 1 and 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put the 2 here, and I'm going to put the 1 here. So plus 2 and plus 1. So just to show you that, if we expand our brackets, 3x times x would be 3x squared. 3x times 2 would be plus 6x. 1 times x is then plus x, and 1 times 2 would be plus 2. And then if we simplify this, add the middle terms together, we get 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. And that's what we wanted. So that's why in this question, because I knew I wanted to get 7x in the middle, I actually chose to put the 2 here, because I could multiply by the 3x. I could do 3x times 2 is 6x, and then x times 1 is 1x, and adding them together will give us our 7x. So that's why I chose that way. Okay, so that's one approach to factorizing this. Another approach is that split in the middle technique, and I'll show you that now. Okay, so we're now going to factorize this by using the split in the middle technique. So if I wanted to factorize this using the split in the middle technique, the first thing I would do is I would look and see what the coefficient of the x squared is. In other words, what number is in front of the x squared, that's 3. And I would look and see what number's on the end of the quadratic, which is 2. And I would do 3 multiplied by 2, and that's equal to 6. Now what we want to do is we want to look at the middle term, and we want to find two numbers that will multiply together to be equal to 6, but they will add together to be equal to 7. So two numbers that will multiply together to be equal to 6 and add together to be 7. Well, 6 multiplied by 1 is equal to 6, fantastic, and 6 plus 1 is equal to 7. And now what we're going to do is we're going to split the 7x into a 6x and an x. Now it doesn't actually matter which way around you do it. You could do plus 6x plus x, or plus x plus 6x. It doesn't matter which way around you do it, and then we've got our plus 2. So now what we're going to do is we've split the middle term up, our 7x, into an x and a 6x. Remember, x plus 6x is just 7x. Now what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the first two terms, and we're going to factorize those, and then we're going to look at the second two terms and factorize those. So factorizing the first two terms, well, 3x squared plus x could come out as a common factor, and we'll be left with 3x plus 1. If you factorize 3x squared plus x, you would get x bracket 3x plus 1, close brackets. And then if we factorize our next two terms, we've got 6x plus 2. Well, we could divide both of those by 2, so we're going to write them plus 2, and then in brackets 3x plus 1. And you'll notice we've got the same bracket, and whenever you're using the split in the middle technique, you should get the same thing in both of those brackets. So here we've got x lots of this bracket, we've got 2 lots of this bracket, so altogether that'll be x plus 2 lots of that bracket. And that's it. So we'd have x plus 2 lots of 3x plus 1. And as you can see here, we have factorized 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. And we've got x plus 2, and then in brackets 3x plus 1. And that's the same as what we got using the other technique. Okay, let's have a look at another question. Factorize 2x squared plus 15x minus 38. So pause the video now and give this one a shot yourself. Okay, so let's factorize this. So I'm going to put our brackets down, bracket, 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 bracket. We want two things that multiply together to be 2x squared, so I'm going to go for 2x and x. And we want two numbers that will multiply together to be minus 38. Now, because it's minus 38, I'm going to choose 19 and minus 2, because 19 times minus 2 will be minus 38. And also I'm thinking, well, if I've got 19, I could put that over this side here and put plus 19 here. And I could put the minus 2 here. And let's just check and see if I expand this, do I get what we started with? So 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times minus 2 would be minus 4x. 19 multiplied by x would be plus 19x. And then 19 multiplied by minus 2 would be minus 38. And then here, if we simplify this, we'd get 2x squared. Then we've got minus 4x plus 19x, that'll be plus 15x, which is what we wanted, fantastic. And then minus 38, and that's it. And as I said, the more of these you practice, the quicker you get at them, and the better you get at spotting where things should go. Now, because I wanted 15x, I thought the 19 was quite useful, and I thought if I'd done 19 multiplied by x, that'd be 19x in the middle. And then it just happened happens to be that whenever you multiply the 2x by the minus 2, you get minus 4, so that brings you back down to the 15x that we wanted. And that's it. So if you're asked to factorize 2x squared plus 15x minus 38, the answer would be 2x plus 19, x minus 2. Okay, now let's have a look at this using the split in the middle technique. Okay, if we wanted to use a split in the middle technique on factorizing this, we take our coefficient of our x squared, which is 2, and we multiply that by the number on the end, which is minus 38. And 2 times minus 38 would be minus 76. Now we want to find two numbers that will multiply together to be minus 76 and add together to be 15. So what I'm thinking is, I'm thinking negative 4 and 19, because negative 4 multiplied by 19 would be negative 76, and minus 4 plus 19 would be equal to 15. So that means that we've got negative 4 and 19. So now let's write this down. Let's split the middle. So we've got 2x squared minus 4x plus 19x minus 38. And as you can see, we've split the middle term into minus 4x and 19x. And then when you add them together, you get your 15x. Now we're going to factorize the first two terms, and then we're going to factorize the second two terms. So factorizing the first two terms, you can divide both of these by 2x. So you get 2x bracket, and then we'd have x minus 2, close brackets. Then we've got plus, and then you can divide both of these by 19, so we'd have 19 bracket, x minus 2, close brackets. Fantastic, we've got the same bracket, that's great. So we've got 2x lots of x minus 2, we've got 19 lots of x minus 2, so altogether that'll be 2x plus 19 lots of x minus 2. And that's it, so we've factorized it. And as I said, you can use either technique. I do prefer inspection myself, but obviously if you like split in the middle and you're good at it, feel free to do that. Okay, let's have a look at one more example. So this time we've been asked to factorize 8x squared minus 10x minus 3. So using inspection, bracket, 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 bracket. Now because this is 8x squared, we could have 4x and 2x, or we could have 8x and x. So that's why this one's a bit trickier than the ones we've looked at so far. And we know the two numbers are multiplied together to give us negative 3. So let's see if we're going to be negative 1 and 3 or negative 3 and 1, obviously in either order. So I'm going to try, first of all, I'm going to try 4x and 2x just to see what we get. And I'm going to try plus 3 over this side, and I'm going to try minus 1 over this side. Now I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm going to try it and see if that's the right answer, and then if need be I'll make a few changes. So 4x times 2x is 8x squared, fantastic. 4x times 3 is 12x, that's not looking good. And minus 1 times 2x would be minus 2, that'd be 10x, so that'd be 12x minus 2x, which is 10x. Oh, that's close. Actually, if we swap the signs around, if we change that to a minus and that to a plus, then that should be the right answer. Let's see. Okay, so 4x times 2x is 8x squared, fantastic. 4x times minus 3 would be minus 12x. 1 times 2x is 2x, minus 12x plus 2x is minus 10x, and 1 times minus 3 would be minus 3. And that's it. So we've factorized that quadratic. Excellent. Okay, now using the split in the middle technique. Okay, using the split in the middle technique, we're going to do 8 multiplied by minus 3. 8 multiplied by minus 3 is equal to minus 24. So we want two numbers that will multiply together to be minus 24 and add together to be minus 10. So I'm thinking negative 12 and 2. Because negative 12 multiplied by 2 will be minus 24, and negative 12 plus 2 is equal to minus 10. So we've got two numbers that will multiply together to be minus 24, and they add together to be minus 10. Now we can split the middle, so we'll write our 8x squared minus 12x plus 2x minus 3. Let's factorize the first two and factorize the second two. So factorizing the first two would be, well, 8x squared minus 12x. I'm thinking 4x, so 4x bracket, and then we would have 2x minus, and then we've got 3. So factorizing 8x squared minus 12x would be 4x bracket, 2x minus 3, close brackets. And then factorizing the next two, well, actually, the only thing we can divide these by are 1, so we're going to do plus 1 lot of 2x minus 3. Okay, and that's great because we've got the same thing in both brackets. So now we've got 4x lots of this bracket and 1 lot of this bracket. So altogether that'll be 4x plus 1 lots of that bracket. And that's it, and we've factorized it. So that's it, and you can use either approach. Okay, just before we move on to looking at how to solve quadratics by using factorization, I want to look at a special type of factorization called the difference between two squareds. So if you get something squared, subtract something squared, you can factorize it by doing bracket, 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 bracket. You can square root both of the terms, so that'll be x and 7, x and 7, and you can put a plus sign and a minus sign. And that's that factorized, and you can check it. X times x is x squared, x times minus 7 would be minus 7x. 7 times x is plus 7x. And 7 times minus 7 would be minus 49. Minus 7x plus 7x is 0, so it'll be x squared. And then that's 0, they cancel out. And then we'll just be left with minus 49. So as you can see, if we expand these brackets, we get x squared minus 49. And that's great, because if we had something like this, you could factorize it really simply by just square rooting them both and put one bracket with a plus sign and one bracket with a minus sign. So it's called the difference between two squareds. Okay, let's have a look at one for you to try yourself now. So here's the difference between two squareds factorization question. So can you factorize y squared minus 64? Okay, so if you wanted to factorize this, because you've got y squared and 64, which is a squared number, you could do bracket, 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 bracket. You can then put y in the front of both brackets, then 8 and 8, and one with a plus sign and one with a minus sign, or it could be a minus sign and a plus sign. So if you were asked to factorize y squared minus 64, you'd have y plus 8 and y minus 8. And if you expand those brackets, you'd get back to what you started with. So that's it. Okay, now let's have a look at our next one. So this time we've been asked to factorize fully 45x squared subtract 80y squared. Now, on first inspection, this doesn't look like a difference between two squareds question, but it actually is. So I want you to think about, could you actually do a bit of factorization first and then get a difference between two squareds question? So feel free to pause the video now and see if you can maybe factorize a little bit and then do difference between two squareds and see if that would work for you. Okay, so if I was asked to factorize this, the first thing I notice is that both of these numbers are divisible by 5. Obviously, 45 is not a square number and 80 is not a square number, so we can't use the difference between two squareds straight away. So I'm going to factorize this by taking out 5, first of all. So if I take out 5, and then I would have 9x squared, because 45 divided by 5 is 9, subtract, and 80 divided by 5 is 16, y squared. Okay, so I've just factorized by taking the 5 out. And then if we look at this, 9x squared, well, that's something squared. 16y squared, that's something squared. So we can use the difference between two squareds. So we'd have 5, and then bracket, 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 bracket. And then we would write 3x and 3x, and 4y and 4y, and one with a plus sign and one with a minus sign. So we factorized it. And if you expand this, you'll see that you'll get 45x squared minus 80y squared. And that's it. Okay, so we've looked at factorising quadratics. We're now going to look at how we can use that to solve quadratics. Now, before we carry on, if you're studying for GCSE higher, factorising quadratics and solving quadratics is very, very useful. It could be used perhaps in algebraic fractions. It could be used in questions maybe where you're forming equations and then having to solve them. It's a very useful technique, and you'll find that you might get questions just like this, but you might be using these skills within other questions. So the amount of marks that can go to being able to factorise and solve quadratics is actually quite high on the papers. So it's very important that you perhaps try the practice questions after this video and you give those a try just to make sure you're really confident with those factorizing and solving quadratics. Okay, so in this video we're going to focus on solving quadratics by using factorization. There are other videos on this list as I go closer to, one day to go. As I go down through the days, there will be videos on solving quadratics using the quadratic formula and solving quadratics using completing the square as well. So here we've got solve x squared plus 11x plus 28 equals 0. So if you wanted to solve a quadratic equation like this is a quadratic equation where we've got a quadratic and it's an equation. If you want to solve a quadratic equation like this, first thing you want to do is make it equal to 0. So that's fantastic. And then what you want to do is you want to factorize it. So pause the video now and factorize this left-hand side. Okay, so if you factorize this left-hand side, you should have got bracket, 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 bracket. And then we've got x squared plus 11x plus 28. So because it's x squared, that's nice. We've got x. And we want to find two numbers that will multiply together to be 28, and they'll add together to be 11. And I'm thinking 4 and 7, so plus 4 and plus 7. So we've got x plus 4 multiplied by x plus 7 equals 0. Fantastic. So we've done our first step in solving this quadratic equation by using factorization. Now, here we've got something multiplied by something equals 0. Now, if I was to ask you to tell me two numbers that multiply together to give me 0, go ahead, think of two numbers that multiply together to be 0. Okay, so you might have chosen 8 multiplied by 0. If you actually chose those numbers, that's class. But you could have chosen 9 multiplied by 0, 15 multiplied by 0, 0.5 multiplied by 0, 0 times 0. But one of them has to be 0. If those two numbers are multiplied together to be 0, one of them, or both of them, are equal to 0. So whenever you're solving a quadratic equation like this one, we're going to actually get two different answers. Here, for this bracket, we want to find what makes this bracket 0. And here, if we've got x plus 4 equals 0, if x is equal to minus 4, you get minus 4 plus 4 is equal to 0. So if you have x plus 4, our answer would be x equals minus 4, because minus 4 plus 4 is equal to 0. So we think, what makes this bracket 0? minus 4 plus 4 is equal to 0. So that's one of our two answers, x equals minus 4. So we've got one possible answer, that x is equal to negative 4. Okay, now let's have a look at the other bracket. If we want to make this bracket equal to 0, let's think what value of x would make this bracket equal to 0? Well, negative 7 plus 7 is equal to 0. So if x is equal to negative 7. And there are two answers, that either x equals negative 4 or x equals negative 7. And that's it. So if we were asked to solve this equation, x squared plus 11x plus 28 equals 0, because it equals 0, that's great. We can then just try to factorize the left-hand side. And if it factorizes, fantastic, because then we can just make each bracket equal to 0. Think what value of x makes each bracket equal to 0. And that is x equals negative 4 or x equals negative 7. And there are two solutions. Okay, now here's one for you to try yourself. So feel free to pause the video and to solve this equation. So if I wanted to solve this equation, because it equals 0, that's great. I can just then try to factorize the left-hand side. And if it factorizes, fantastic. That's equal to 0. So factorizing this, we've got x squared minus 6x minus 27. So we will want to have then in the front of both brackets, x and x. We then want to find two numbers that multiply together to be negative 27 and then add together to be negative 6. So I'm thinking negative 9 and 3, because negative 9 times 3 would be equal to negative 27, and negative 9 plus 3 would be equal to negative 6. Fantastic, so we've factorized it. Now we want to see what the values of x would be to make each bracket equal to 0. So here, x is equal to 9, and here, x is equal to negative 3. And there will be our two solutions, that either x equals 9 or x equals negative 3. And let's just check it. 9 squared is 81. Subtract 6 lots of 9, so subtract 54 is equal to 27. Take away 27 is equal to 0. And if we had negative 3 squared is 9. Subtract 6 lots of negative 3. Well, that's going to be subtract minus 18. And 9 subtract minus 18 would be equal to 27. Take away 27 is equal to 0. So there are two solutions. Okay, let's have a look at our next one. So this time we've got a quadratic, and instead of it being an x squared one, we've got 3x squared plus x minus 4 equals 0. So again, if you think back to earlier in the video, we talked about how to factorize these. So just try and factorize this left-hand side and put it into brackets to begin with, and then get equals 0. And whenever you've done that, then press play. Okay, so if I wanted to factorize this, I want to put it into brackets. So bracket equals 0. We've got 3x squared, so I'm thinking 3x and x. And then we've got two numbers that multiply together to be negative 4. But when we expand the brackets, we're just going to get an x. So I'm thinking if I put our negative 1 there and our plus 4 there, let's see if that would work. 3x times x is 3x squared. Fantastic. 3x times minus 1 would be minus 3x. And 4 times x is 4x. Minus 3x plus 4x is x. Fantastic. Now, obviously, if we've got two brackets multiplying together to be 0, either one of the brackets is equal to 0. Now, this one's quite straightforward. X equals 1. That's one of the solutions, because obviously 1 take away 1 is equal to 0. And if we just check it, 1 squared is 1, times 3 is 3, plus 1 is equal to 4. Take away 4 is 0. Fantastic. Now, in terms of this bracket, whenever it's not just an x at the front, you've got 3x plus 4. I like to write it down as 3x plus 4 equals 0, because we want this bracket to be equal to 0. So I write it down like a little equation, and then I solve it. I do that just so I don't make a mistake. Sometimes I find if students go straight from this bracket to write down what the answer is, sometimes they write the fraction the wrong way around, or they make it positive or negative and so on. So I just put this bracket equals 0, and I do that whenever I have anything at the front instead of an x. So if I had 2x or 5x or 3x plus something or minus something, I then just write down the bracket equals 0. And then let's solve this. If I solve this equation, I would take away 4 and take away 4 from both sides of the equation. So I get 3x equals negative 4. And then I'm going to divide by 3 and divide by 3. So I get x equals negative, and then 4 divided by 3, 4/3. So that means that either x is equal to 1, so x is equal to 1, or and, depending on what you want to write there, x is equal to negative 4/3. And that's it. There are two solutions.
And that's it. So that's how you factorize quadratics and solve quadratics using factorization. This topic, I highly recommend you look at the practice questions in the description below. And that's it. So I really hope you found this video useful. Please like it and please subscribe to the YouTube channel and keep up the hard work. Cheers. Bye.